My name is Martha Whitmore, and I'm 84 years old. People in my town know me as the quiet old woman who keeps to herself. I own a little antique bookstore at the corner of Wilkins and Sycamore. They smile at me politely. They don't know the truth. They don't know I was raised in a house full of wolves. 10 brothers who didn't see me as a sister, but as something to use. Something to silence. Something to erase. I stood barefoot in the middle of the cold family barn the night it happened. My hair was tangled, my breath frozen in the winter air, and my voice hoarse from hours of screaming. The betrayal didn't start that night. It ended there. Because that was the night my brothers cornered me with a forged paper and a plan. "Sign it, Martha." The oldest, Calvin, growled, holding out a document with trembling rage in his voice. "Dad left the land to all of us, not just you. Don't play stupid." But I wasn't stupid. I had cared for our father through all his dying days. I cooked his food, cleaned his wounds, held his hand when the cancer made him cry like a child. He left me the land. I had the original will. And now they wanted to take it. All of them. "Please, this isn't right," Daddy wanted. My words barely made it out before I felt David's hand slap the paper against my chest. "Just sign it." Then came the moment I'll never forget. One of them shoved me so hard, I hit the ground headfirst against the feed trough. I remember blood. I remember boots. I remember trying to crawl, but my legs wouldn't move. I screamed until I passed out. And that was just the beginning. But what they didn't know was, I lived. And when I woke up, I remembered everything. I bet you're wondering how I ended up in a barn that night, surrounded by the same brothers I once braided daisy chains with. The truth is, betrayal doesn't come all at once. It starts slowly. Like a storm you don't notice until it's already swallowed the sky. Let me take you back. I was the youngest of 11 children, born in 1939 in a small wooden house on the edge of Westmore County. My mama died giving birth to me. My brothers always said I was cursed from the moment I took my first breath. I was raised by bitter hands and cold stares. But I never imagined those same boys would grow into men who'd see me as a threat. As a little girl I adored them. I fetched their shoes. I cooked their meals while still learning to spell. I ran between their arguments with bowls of stew and begged them to stop fighting. But they never saw me as an equal. Only as a girl. Curious what pushed those boys to take everything from me. Started the year Daddy fell ill. At first it was small things, aches, coughing, trouble walking. The boys said he was just tired, but I knew better. He started calling for me at night. Whispering regrets. Holding my hand and asking me if I believed in God. I stayed by his side night and day, while all 10 of them avoided the house like a plague. But when Daddy passed, everything changed. He left a will. And I was the sole heir. The land. A house. A barn. Cattle. All of it. He said it was because I was the only one who stayed. The only one who cared. The boys didn't take it well. They said I manipulated him. They said I was lying. They said I had cast a spell. At first they tried to talk me into giving them a share. I was still soft then. I thought maybe we could divide it fairly. I said I'd think about it. But then Calvin got lawyers involved. He forged a new will and convinced some of the town to back him. He told people I was mentally unstable. He told them I wasn't safe alone on the land. I lost friends. I lost respect. And then one night they came to the house. 10 of them. Each face more twisted than the next. They dragged me to the barn. That's the part you already know. But what you don't know is what I did when I woke up. Because when I opened my eyes that morning, lying in hay and blood and shame, I made a promise. I would never scream again. I would never beg again. And I would never let them win. That's when my real story began. And trust me, it gets worse before it gets better. Because you see, I still had one thing they didn't know about, something that would make them pay. But that's a story for the next chapter. Before we continue, ask yourself, what would you do if your entire family turned on you? Could you survive the kind of betrayal that leaves you with nothing but scars? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget, backhand index pointing right like this video. Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe for the rest of Martha's story. Backhand index pointing right. Share this with someone who believes in karma. I woke up alone. The barn smelled of old hay and iron, noises of distant crows echoing across the fields. My body felt like it had been dragged behind a tractor. My head throbbed, my side ached with every shallow breath, and something was crusted on my cheek. Dried blood, maybe tears. My lips trembled, but not from cold, from truth. It had happened. They really did it. They took me from my bed, dragged me through my own backyard, and dumped me like a dead animal in the barn that Daddy built with his bare hands. They didn't care if I survived. Maybe they hoped I wouldn't. But I did. Barely. I forced my hands beneath me and pushed off the ground. The pain was unbearable, but I bit my tongue. I didn't scream this time. Not again. No one would hear me even if I did. That was the moment something cracked open inside me. Not a bone, but something deeper. I remembered Daddy's words the night before he passed. Don't let them break you, March. You're stronger than all 10 of them put together. I crawled out of that barn on my elbows and knees. Took me 32 minutes. I know because I counted. Each crawl, each breath, each sob I held back. My house, looked so far away. But I made it. When I pushed open the back door, the kitchen was silent. The same kitchen where I had fed those boys grits and gravy every morning for years. The same linoleum floor they tracked their muddy boots across. The same sink I stood over while washing their socks after Sunday football. I dragged myself up onto a chair and looked around like it was the first time I'd ever seen it. Then I cried. For 10 whole minutes. Not just because I was hurt, but because I realized I was alone now. Truly alone. No neighbors would believe me. Not after Calvin smeared my name across every church picnic and town hall meeting. He said I'd gone senile. That I was hiding a new will. That I was possessed. I was just a tired woman trying to honor her father's last wish. I leaned over to grab the phone. But the line was dead. I sat back slowly and stared at the broken wires. They'd planned this. They wanted to isolate me. They wanted to ruin me, quietly. A few days later, the first letter came. I was still bruised, still healing, still jumping at every creak in the wood. But the envelope was clean, typed out, official-looking. It was from a lawyer. Notice of property dispute. Whitmore Ranch. They were suing me. All 10 of them. They said the will I had was fraudulent. That Daddy had changed it weeks before he died and named all of them as beneficiaries. They were going to drag me into court, strip me of the land, and declare me unfit to live alone. I folded the letter slowly, placed it on the kitchen table, and sat in silence for hours. I didn't eat that night. Didn't sleep either. But I did start making a plan. You see, they thought I'd roll over. They thought I'd be too broken to fight back. They thought wrong. First I went to the attic. Daddy's old tin box was still hidden beneath the floorboard. Inside it were love letters from my mama, war medals from Korea, and, most importantly, the original will. The real one. With his seal. With his lawyer's name and date. I knew they'd say it was fake. But I had something more powerful than a piece of paper. I had memories. I had history. I had truth. The next morning I took that will and I walked, limping the whole way, to the only lawyer in town who still spoke to me, Mr. Langley. He looked at me, his eyes wide when he saw the bruises on my face. "My God, Martha," he whispered. "What happened to you?" I didn't answer. I just handed him the envelope. He opened it slowly and his lips tightened. "Where did you get this?" "My father's attic," I said. "Why didn't you bring it sooner?" "Because I thought family meant something." He looked down at the paper again, then back at me. "Martha, this is strong. The seal is intact. The witness signatures match records." "I want to fight," I told him. He nodded slowly. But then he said something that made my stomach twist. "You'll need evidence. Witnesses. Maybe even medical proof of what they did to you. They'll lie. All of them. And they've got money." I didn't have money. But I had scars. And scars tell their own stories. The weeks that followed were like walking through fire. Every day I woke up, pain screaming through my ribs, and dressed myself slowly. I began writing everything, from childhood to the present. I collected old photographs, Daddy's letters, birthday cards, anything that proved I lived in that house, not them. I recorded myself speaking, reading Daddy's will, telling the truth over and over. But then the threats began. First, it was an anonymous note on my doorstep. "Give it up, Martha. You're too old to fight this." Then it was dead birds thrown on my porch. One for each brother. Even the mailman stopped coming. People in town crossed the street when I walked by. I became a ghost in my own life. But ghosts don't disappear. They haunt. And I was ready to haunt every single one of them. On a Tuesday morning, the sheriff came knocking. I thought maybe someone had come to check on me. Instead, he handed me a court summons. My brothers were accusing me of forgery, elder fraud, and trespassing on my own land. I looked him in the eye and said, "Sheriff McGraw, you've known me since I was born. You've seen those boys, drunk, violent, wild. Do you really think I'm the criminal?" He blinked. "I don't know what's going on, Martha. But I suggest you get a good lawyer. I've got one. Then good luck." When he left, I shut the door and let the tears fall for the last time. I would cry no more. That night I went to the closet, pulled out the rusted trunk, and opened the false bottom. Inside was Daddy's journal. I'd forgotten it existed. When I opened the cracked spine, I saw his handwriting. "If something happens to me and this family turns on Martha, she has my blessing to do whatever it takes. She earned this land. The boys didn't. God forgive them." He wrote that 3 months before he died. He knew. He knew they'd come for me. And now I had more than a will. I had his words. Proof of his love. His trust. I scanned the pages and sent them to Langley. He called me that night. "Martha," he said, his voice breathless. "You just turned this case upside down." But it wasn't over. Because that very night, my front window shattered. A rock landed on my floor. Taped to it was a photo of me, crossed out in red ink. And beneath it, a note. "If you step into that courtroom, you'll leave in a box." Froze. I'd been quiet before. I'd been scared. But now I was furious. They wanted to break me. Let them try. Because I still had one more secret left. Something even they didn't know. Something buried beneath the floorboards of the barn. But that's for next time. Let me ask you this. Backhand index pointing right. If your own blood turned against you, would you fight or flee? Backhand index pointing right. Have you ever been betrayed by the ones who were supposed to protect you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in justice for the voiceless, fire like this video. Fire subscribe for the next chapter. Fire share this story so Martha's voice is never silenced again. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? The rock still sat on the floor beside the broken glass. My photo stared back at me, slashed with red ink like I was already dead. It wasn't just a threat anymore. It was a promise. They wanted me silenced. Forever. I thought of calling the sheriff again, but what would I say? My brothers threatened to kill me. But all I have is a picture and my gut. He'd probably nod, write a report and drive away. They knew no one would believe an old woman. Especially not me. Not in a town where men like my brothers drank with the mayor and slapped backs at the church potluck. But I wasn't the girl who used to cry in the hayloft anymore. Well, I was the woman who'd crawled out of a barn, broken and bleeding, with nothing but her name and her father's truth. And I still stood tall. I walked to the hallway and opened the trapdoor that led to the cellar. The wooden stairs groaned under my weight as I descended into the cool, earthy darkness. This was where I kept my final ace. Daddy had told me about it once, a long time ago, back when I was just 15 and sitting on his knee while he smoked a pipe on the porch. "There are things men do that they hope never see the light," he said. "But sometimes, baby girl, you need to keep receipts. Just in case." He buried his secrets beneath the barn floor, but I buried my own beneath the house. Metal chest, rusty, cold, chained shut. Inside was a collection I hadn't touched in over 40 years. Documents. Old recordings from the reel-to-reel. Receipts for land purchases. Personal notes Daddy made after fights with the boys. Real thoughts, handwritten confessions he never meant to be found but didn't want to lose either. And at the bottom, photograph. Black and white. A young me, barely 10 years old, bruises on my arms, tear streaks on my cheeks, hiding behind the woodshed. Daddy had written something on the back. They did this to her. Lord help me. My knees buckled. I hadn't remembered that day until I saw it. A wave of nausea slammed through me. I dropped to the dirt and hugged my chest. Even back then, they were cruel. And Daddy knew. He just didn't know what to do about it. I climbed back upstairs, clutching the evidence, and called Langley. I need you to come, I said. Now. He arrived just before midnight. I laid the chest on the kitchen table and opened it in front of him. The moment he saw the documents, his eyebrows raised. When he saw the photograph, his mouth opened, but no sound came out. Martha, he whispered. This is more than a land case now. This is a legacy of abuse. I want everything. Their whole system of lies burned to the ground, I said, voice steady. But I want it legal. I want it clean. I want them to stand in front of a judge and know it was me who brought them down. Langley nodded slowly. And then he told me something that made my blood run cold. They've filed a separate petition. For what? To have you declared mentally unfit. They want power of attorney over you. If they win, you'll lose everything before trial even begins. I stared at him. And who's the judge? Judge Greer. Calvin's hunting buddy, I whispered, feeling bile rise in my throat. Langley stood. We need to move fast. For the next week, I didn't rest. Langley helped me get a psychological evaluation from a professional in a different county. Passed, of course. I still read 3 newspapers a day and could recite scripture by memory. But the process was humiliating. Like I had to prove I wasn't a crazy old woman, while the monsters wore suits and smiled on Sundays. Langley said we'd need witnesses. People who knew me, who could speak to my sanity, my kindness, my stability. Called 3. Only one agreed. Clara Mae Jenkins. My childhood best friend. She arrived with a cane and her eyes full of tears. I always knew those boys would bring trouble, she said, shaking her head. Martha, I'm so sorry I stayed silent all these years. I don't need sorry, Clara. I need truth. And she gave it. Signed an affidavit, sat for a recorded interview, and told the story of how I'd raised my brothers after Mama died. How I fed them, clothed them, took beatings for them. How they blamed me when Daddy showed me more love than he ever gave them. Jealousy, she said. Pure evil jealousy. Then came the day of the competency hearing. I wore a plain navy dress and combed my hair back tight. I carried Daddy's will and the photograph in my bag. My brothers all sat on the other side, smirking. Calvin wore a smug expression like he'd already won. The judge entered. Greer. As expected. I stood alone. Langley beside me. Calvin spoke first, dripping with fake concern. Your Honor, we're just worried about Martha. She's old. She's isolated. She's confused. We want to help her manage the land fairly. That's all. He didn't flinch. Then it was my turn. I stood, reached into my bag and pulled out the photo. This was me, I said, holding it up. Age 10. Hiding from the same brothers who now say they care for me. Greer's eyes narrowed. I handed it to the clerk. Then I spoke with every ounce of strength I had. My father left me that land. Earned it. Cared for him. Fed them. Cleaned up their messes. I know who I am. And I'm not insane. I'm just finally fighting back. The room fell silent. Then Langley introduced the affidavit, the psychological exam, the will, the journal entries. For once, truth felt like a fire catching wind. But I knew it wasn't over. Because as we left the courthouse, Calvin brushed past me and whispered, "That was cute. But it won't be enough." And that night my barn caught fire. The smoke woke me. I ran barefoot into the cold night air and saw the flames licking the sky. The same barn where Daddy had taught me to saddle a horse. The same barn where I learned to milk a cow. By the time firefighters arrived, the roof had collapsed. The smell of ash filled my lungs as I stood in silence, tears cutting through soot on my cheeks. A sheriff's deputy approached. "Ma'am, we're investigating. Could have been electrical." "No," I said. "It wasn't. I knew who did it. No need for guesses. They wanted to erase evidence. Erase history. Erase me. But they missed something. The fire may have taken wood, but it didn't touch the tin box in my attic. It didn't burn the copies we sent to Langley. And it didn't scorch the fire burning in my chest. Because if they thought fire would scare me, they forgot who raised me. And they forgot what I was still holding on to. Bank key. One Daddy gave me before he passed. To be used only if they turn on you. I never opened the box. Till now. And when I did, what I found changed everything. Tell me honestly. Backhand index pointing right. What would you have done if your family set fire to your legacy? Backhand index pointing right. Could you stand your ground when you've already lost everything? Let's talk in the comments. Fire like this video. Fire subscribe for the next chapter. It's about to get explosive. Fire share this story with someone who needs to see that age doesn't make you weak. The bank was quiet that morning. Too quiet. I could hear the rhythm of my own breathing, the scuff of my boots on the tiled floor, the polite hum of the overhead lights. And then I heard the voice of the young teller behind the counter. She didn't recognize me at first. Most of the young ones didn't. They hadn't been around in the years when the Whitmore family name meant power in this town. Back when Daddy ran cattle through Westmore County and everyone wanted a seat at his table. "I'm here to access a safety deposit box," I said. "Whitmore. Box number 219. She smiled politely and tapped on her keyboard. Then her face changed. "Just a moment, ma'am." She disappeared into the back. When she returned, she wasn't alone. The branch manager, an older man named Mr. Dalton, came with her. He wore a gray suit, thin spectacles, and the kind of face that looked like it never truly smiled. But when he saw the key in my hand, something flickered in his eyes. "Miss Martha Whitmore?" he asked softly. He nodded. He gestured for me to follow him down the hallway. The vault was colder than I expected. The walls were concrete. Steel doors locked behind us. It felt like a tomb, and somehow it suited what I was about to do. I followed him to the far corner where a single steel drawer sat waiting. "Your father opened this box in 1971, Dalton explained. "He came in once a year to check it. No one else has accessed it since." He slid the key into the lock and twisted it. The click echoed like a gunshot. Inside was a thick manila envelope. And one folded piece of paper on top with Daddy's handwriting. "For Martha. If the boys ever become what I fear." My hands shook as I opened the envelope. What I saw made me lean against the wall to keep from collapsing. Inside were land titles, original deeds, bank records, mineral rights agreements. And at the bottom, a letter from a private investigator Daddy had hired on his own sons. That's when the pieces began to fall into place. Daddy hadn't just suspected betrayal. He had prepared for it. The letter described suspicious withdrawals from his personal accounts, land leaseback schemes forged by Calvin, and missing cattle transactions with David's signature on them. I had proof that they had been stealing from Daddy before he even passed. Proof that the same sons now calling me crazy had been lining their pockets with Whitmore money for years behind his back. One document in particular stopped my breath. An unsigned partnership agreement between Calvin and a land developer to sell parts of the ranch once Daddy died. He had planned this for years. And he never thought I'd find it. But I had. I clutched the envelope to my chest and thanked Mr. Dalton. As I walked back out into the morning light, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Oh. But it didn't last long. Because the moment I turned the corner near the post office, a truck swerved at me. So fast I had to leap back onto the curb to keep from being crushed. The driver didn't stop. Didn't even slow down. I didn't see the face, but I didn't need to. I knew what that was. A warning. Or a threat. I walked the rest of the way home with one hand on the evidence and one eye over my shoulder. Langley arrived at my house that afternoon. I spread everything on the table. His face went pale as he flipped through the documents. "This changes the case," he muttered. "Martha, this could open a criminal investigation." "Then let it. But it's going to get dangerous now." "It already is." He looked at me hard. "You're not scared." "I'm angry." "That's stronger than fear." Langley put his hand on the deed. "Let's bury them." But we didn't know the storm coming. The next morning, someone had spray painted across my front door. "Crazy liar. Die already." The sheriff came. Again. Took photos. Again. Filed a report. Again. But no arrest. No action. "You think it was one of them?" he asked, not even looking me in the eye. I didn't answer. Because the answer was obvious. Instead, I walked back into the house and called the local news station. They didn't answer. So I called another. And another. Finally, a young journalist named Shannon Briggs picked up. I told her the story. All of it. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then she asked, "Would you be willing to go on camera?" And I said yes. 2 days later, she arrived at my house with a cameraman. They interviewed me in my living room. I showed them the bruises, the documents, the letters, the deeds. She looked shaken. "This is bigger than one woman's land," she said. "This is corruption, family abuse, power run wild." When the segment aired on the 6 o'clock news, it sent a ripple through the entire town. Some people scoffed, others whispered. But one thing was undeniable. Martha Whitmore was no longer silent. And then something happened that changed everything. I received a letter. Not from a lawyer. Not from a court. From a stranger. A woman named Jolene Carter. She lived in the next county over. And she claimed that her late husband had worked with Calvin Whitmore. She said Calvin had confided in him about wanting to take the land from me. She had recordings. From phone calls. From dinner conversations. She wrote, "I kept these tapes because my husband always said Calvin was planning something dirty. I didn't know who you were until I saw your face on the news." Langley and I drove to her house the next morning. She was in her 60s, kind, with a nervous smile and shaking hands. She handed us a dusty box of cassette tapes and said, "Do whatever you need to. I hope this helps." We brought them back and digitized the audio. And sure enough, Calvin's voice. Loud, clear, drunk, saying things like, "Martha's not gonna last long. One way or another, we'll get that land. And worse. If she don't sign, we'll make her." My stomach turned. Langley stared at the screen in disbelief. "This is enough to launch an indictment," he said. "We need to go federal." We sent everything to the district attorney. And within 48 hours, an investigator showed up at Calvin's house. The brothers were no longer circling me. They were circling themselves. They started turning on each other. First Dean, the youngest, called me in secret. He sounded panicked. "I didn't know they were gonna hurt you, Martha. Swear. I thought it was just about the money." I didn't respond. He whispered, "They're saying you have tapes. If the feds get involved." "They already are." Then I hung up. Let them sweat. Let them wonder which one of them I'd take down first. But I wasn't done yet. Because I still had one more card to play. You see, Daddy's journal had one more passage I hadn't shown Langley yet. One more secret. Name. A hidden land deal made with a third party just before his death. It wasn't just the ranch they wanted. It was what lay beneath it. Natural gas. Worth millions. And Calvin knew. He'd always known. That's why they came for me. That's why they tried to kill me. Not for the cows. Not for the barn. For the money. For the future. And now, I had the proof. But the question was, would I live long enough to use it? Because that night, just after midnight, as I was turning off the porch light, I heard the soft creak of the back gate. And then, glass shattered in the living room. So let me ask you, dear listener. Backhand index pointing right, what would you do if your own blood wanted to bury you alive? For money you didn't even know existed. Backhand index pointing right, have you ever learned something about your family that made you question your entire past? Let's talk in the comments. Fire if you believe the truth will always find the light. Like this video. Fire if you want justice for Martha. Subscribe for the next chapter. Fire and share this story, so the world knows that age isn't weakness. It's wisdom on fire. The crash of the living room window wasn't just glass shattering. It was a message. I grabbed the old iron poker by the fireplace. Hands trembling but heart steady. My feet moved on instinct. Quiet. Cautious. Careful not to let the floor creak too loud. The cold of the hardwood seeped into my bare feet as I moved toward the front of the house. Shards of glass glistened in the moonlight. Wind rushed in through the broken pane. And then I saw it, a boot print on the rug. Someone had been inside. Maybe still was. I raised the poker, every nerve in my body screaming to run. But I didn't. I wouldn't. Not again. I was done letting them push me into corners. I flicked on the hallway light. No one there. Then I heard a rustle from the kitchen. I turned sharply and saw a shadow move past the doorway. I stepped in with the poker raised. Who's there? My voice cracked but rang out strong. Silence. Then a voice. Martha, please, it's me. Ian. The youngest of my brothers. The one who had called just days before in a whisper of regret. He stepped out from behind the pantry door, hands up, wide eyes full of panic. What are you doing in my house? I hissed. I didn't break the window. I swear it was already busted when I got here. I came to warn you. Warn me. I laughed bitterly. You all warned me. With your boots. With your fists. With your fires. He shook his head fast. You don't understand. Calvin's losing control. He knows you found the mineral rights documents. He knows you're going to the feds. He's planning something, Martha. Something big. Bigger than burning my barn. Bigger than nearly running me off the road. He hesitated. Then nodded. He's hiring someone, he whispered. Someone from out of town. Not just to scare you. To end this. I felt the weight of his words press on my lungs like 1,000 bricks. My knees weakened, but I didn't show it. Instead, I lowered the poker slowly. Why are you telling me this? Dean stared at the floor. Because I didn't sign up for this war. I thought it would be money, sure, maybe court battles. But not this. And Mama, if she saw what we've become. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. We both felt the weight of her ghost standing between us. Dean looked up at me with tears in his eyes. I want to help. Whatever I can do. Please. I didn't trust him. But I didn't throw him out either. That night he slept on the couch. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of weak coffee, staring at the shotgun I had pulled from Daddy's old cabinet. And the next morning I called Langley. He broke in. Langley asked, alarmed. Technically, no. The window was already shattered. Then someone else was there before Dean. Or someone sent him to see if I was still alive. Langley was quiet on the other end. I don't trust him, I added. But he's scared. And scared men spill secrets. Langley agreed to increase security. He brought a friend from out of town, retired state trooper named Buck Talley. Buck moved into the guest room with a rifle and a badge that still carried weight. He didn't talk much. But he didn't miss much either. That's when things started to shift. Suddenly I wasn't alone anymore. Dean began volunteering names. Lawyers Calvin paid off, townsfolk on the take, even a contractor who had falsified survey maps to hide the gas wells underneath my land. We gathered everything. We turned the information over to the DA's office. By week's end, they had enough to open a criminal conspiracy case. And then it happened. The front page of the Westmore County Times ran the headline, Whitmore Land War Now a Criminal Probe. Local brothers under investigation. The town was on fire with gossip. The barbershop buzzed with rumors. The mayor's office refused to comment. And Calvin, He vanished. No calls, no threats, no sudden visits, just silence, which was even worse. Because silence meant plotting, scheming. Wolves don't bark when they're hunting. They wait. That weekend I found my chicken coop torn apart. Feathers scattered everywhere. Every bird gone or dead. A single note pinned to the coop wall. Next time it's you. Buck examined the area. No tracks. No cameras. Just clean malice. Dean swore it wasn't him. And I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe anyone in my family was still human. But part of me doubted everything now. The next few days we prepped for court. Langley filed official motions to freeze land transfers, to block Calvin's legal maneuvering, and to petition for criminal subpoenas on every brother who had touched Daddy's accounts in the last 10 years. One morning, as we gathered to organize our evidence, the news broke again. A fire at Calvin's real estate office. Arson suspected. The records inside. I stood on my porch watching the smoke rise in the distance and wondered how long he thought he could burn everything before the truth stopped smoldering. That night, Dean sat with me at the table. "You know he's going to take someone down with him," he said. "Then I'll make sure it's not me. I think he's setting up David. Maybe even Craig. He's calling in debts. Promises. He's turning on his own. Like you." Dean looked up, wounded. "I came here to make it right. And maybe you will," I said. "But don't think that buys back everything you helped burn." The next morning I got a call from Langley. "Calvin's lawyer just called," he said, out of breath. "They want to settle." Settle. They're offering to drop all their claims to the land if you sign a non-disclosure agreement and return all documents about the gas rights. Pause. Then I laughed. "They're trying to buy my silence." Langley didn't laugh. "They know they're cornered, Martha. But they're still dangerous. If you push this to court, if the criminal charges go through, they'll lose everything. Jail time, reputation, property. Some might try to take you out before that. Let them try." "Are you sure?" I looked around my house. Burned barn. Mashed coop. Windows cracked and patched. Photos missing from the walls. The scent of fear still lingering in the air. And then I looked down at my hands. Wrinkled. But still steady. "Yes," I said. "I'm not signing anything. I want the truth to go on record." Langley sighed. "Then get ready. They won't go quietly." And they didn't. The very next day, I woke to the sound of Buck shouting from the yard. I rushed out in my robe to find 2 black SUVs idling at the end of my driveway. Men in suits. Not police. Not reporters. Private men. One stepped forward. "Miss Whitmore." "Yes. We'd like to speak with you. It's about the mineral rights under your property." "Who sent you?" "Just businessmen," he said with a slick smile. "People who want to help you solve all this without dragging your family name through the mud." I narrowed my eyes. "You boys here to talk? Or threaten?" The smile didn't leave his face. "That depends on you, ma'am." I nodded slowly. Then I looked over at Buck, who now had his hand resting on his holster. I smiled back at the man. "You tell your boss I said no. And if I see you on this land again, it'll be the sheriff knocking." The men didn't argue. But as they turned to leave, one of them whispered, "You should have taken the money. Let me ask you truly. Backhand index pointing right, what would you do if greed knocked at your door in the form of suits and silence? Backhand index pointing right, would you take the money? Or make them face the truth? Fire, drop your answer in the comments. Fire, like this video if you believe the truth should never be sold. Fire, subscribe for the next chapter. Justice is about to rise from the ashes. Fire, and share this story with someone who's ever had to stand up to power. The courthouse was already full when I arrived. The moment I stepped out of the car, I could feel them. Touching. Whispering. "She's here. That's Martha. Lord, what did her brothers really do?" Some folks nodded at me with quiet support. Others turned away, unsure of which side to believe. That was fine. I hadn't come for their sympathy. I came for the truth. Buck walked beside me, stiff and alert. Langley carried a briefcase heavier than it looked. Dean trailed behind us, nervously tugging at the sleeves of his jacket. He still hadn't earned my trust back. But today he'd chosen a side. And that counted for something. Inside the courtroom, the tension was thick enough to chew. All 10 of my brothers sat in a single row, pressed together in their pressed suits, whispering among themselves. Calvin sat at the end, legs crossed, confident smirk painted on his face like war paint. He didn't look shaken. He looked ready. He had no idea what was coming. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Henley took the bench, a visiting judge from another county, since Greer had been removed from the case following a formal conflict of interest petition. Thank God. Henley was known for being fair and unbought. "Let's begin," she said, voice steady. "This court will now hear the civil dispute regarding the Whitmore estate." The opening statements were nothing new. Calvin's lawyer painted him as a concerned brother. Claimed Daddy was confused before his death. Claimed the will I had was a forgery. Claimed I'd hidden land rights from the family and had lost touch with reality. I sat silently, chin lifted high, holding back the fire in my chest. Then Langley stood. And our war truly began. "This is a case of betrayal," he said calmly, walking the jury through the timeline. "A case where 10 men sought to erase their sister from history because she inherited what their father gave her in faith and love." He presented the will, the psychiatric clearance, the taped confessions, the documents pulled from the bank box, the signed and dated mineral rights contracts. One by one, like dominoes, the lies began to fall. But it was the audio that shook the room. The moment Calvin's voice played over the speakers, the courtroom stilled. "If she don't sign, we'll make her." The whispers. Even the judge's expression changed. Calvin's lawyer jumped to object, but it was over. The room had heard him. No slick suit could unring that bell. Then Langley called Dean to the stand. He walked up slowly, hands shaking. He took the oath. Sat down. And for the first time in our entire lives, I saw my baby brother speak a full truth. "I was scared," he said, voice raw. "I didn't think it would go that far. But when they hurt Martha, when they burned her barn, sent those threats, I knew it had to stop. She's not crazy. She's the only one of us who was ever decent." He paused, swallowed hard. "And Daddy loved her. He told me once, when I was 12. He said she was the only one who never took from him." Tears burned in my eyes, but I blinked them back. Dean stepped down. Langley rested our case. But Calvin, he wasn't done yet. He rose from his seat like a man who still thought he held the world in his fist. "I want to testify," he said to the judge. His lawyer tried to stop him. But Calvin brushed him off. The court went silent again. He took the stand, raised his hand, swore an oath, then turned toward the jury with that crooked smile. "All of this," he said, waving dramatically, "is a circus." He chuckled low and smug. "My sister, God bless her, she's a good actress. Always was. She's had Daddy wrapped around her little finger since she was 10. While we were working the fields, she was brushing his hair and bringing him tea." There were murmurs in the courtroom. He kept going. "And that gas money. It's a fantasy. The mineral rights aren't worth a penny. She's hanging her whole case on a dream." He leaned in toward the microphone, his voice turning cold. "She's got one foot in the grave. What's she gonna do with all that land anyway?" "That did it." Langley objected. Judge Henley shut it down. But the damage was done. Calvin. His arrogance had turned the room. No one likes a snake when it bares its fangs in public. When the court recessed for lunch, the jury wouldn't look at him. But they looked at me. Really looked. And some nodded. Back at the house, I sat on the porch and stared out at the fields. What was left of them? It was all still mine. But for how long? "If the jury sides with them," I whispered. Langley placed a hand on my shoulder. "They won't. But what if someone gets to them? Pays someone off? Langley shook his head. This judge is sharp. No one's bribing a jury under her watch. Dean stepped outside carrying fresh lemonade. I found something, he said, holding a small notebook. What is it? Daddy's old vet log. Buried in the shed. It has every sale, every lease, every name tied to the ranch since 1962. I opened the book and nearly choked on my own breath. It was all there, including a name we hadn't seen before, an oil company listed under a shell name. Something Calvin must have created to hide the lease agreement before Daddy died. It was proof of intent to defraud, before the inheritance. Langley's eyes lit up. This could nail him shut. The next day in court, Langley entered it as new evidence. Calvin's lawyer nearly choked on his own spit trying to object. The judge overruled. Proceed. That was the moment Calvin's smirk finally cracked. He looked at me. Really looked. For the first time in years he seemed small. The court was adjourned for deliberation. I went home. Alone this time. Buck was doing security rounds, and Dean had gone to meet Langley. The house was quiet. I lit a candle and sat at the window with my Bible, flipping the pages, fingers tracing the verses Daddy used to love. And knock. Not at the door. The back window. Low. Deliberate. 3 taps. My blood froze. I stood and walked slowly to the kitchen. The curtain was drawn. I pulled it back. And there he was. David. Another brother. Face twisted with something between fury and desperation. He held up something in his hand. Lighter. In the other. Gasoline can. So now I ask you. Backhand index pointing right if your own family returned, not to make peace, but to finish what they started, would you run? Or finally fight? Fire comment with what you would do in that moment. Fire like this video if you believe evil must be exposed. Fire subscribe for the next chapter. The final storm is coming. Fire share this story to help others understand that silence is never safety. His eyes weren't the same. David used to have these quiet honey-colored eyes. Kind eyes. He was always the one who picked me up when Calvin shoved me down as a kid. The one who whispered jokes when Daddy was angry. But the man standing outside my kitchen window now. Those weren't kind eyes. They were hollow. Open the door, Martha, he said, his voice muffled through the glass. I just want to talk. But the gas can in his left hand said otherwise. And the lighter he flicked once. Then again. That told me everything. I didn't answer. I backed away from the window and reached behind me for the cast-iron skillet still drying on the counter. My breath stayed low, steady. The woman I used to be would have begged. I wasn't her anymore. David, I've already called the police, I said through the window, lying through my teeth. You've got 10 seconds to get off my property. He laughed. Low. Only. You always were Daddy's favorite, he said. You think that makes you untouchable. Daddy's gone, I said calmly. But justice isn't. He moved toward the back door. I stepped back further into the shadows of the kitchen. Then I heard tires. Loud engine. Buck's truck. Headlights flared across the porch as he pulled into the driveway. The timing couldn't have been better. David turned like a spooked animal, bolted across the field behind the house, and disappeared into the tree line. I ran to the door and opened it just as Buck rushed up the porch steps. I saw someone. It was David, I said. He had gasoline. Buck's eyes narrowed. He pulled his flashlight and ran around the side of the house. I stood frozen in the doorway, clutching the skillet like a shield. By the time Buck returned, David was gone. But he'd left behind the gas can. And a burned spot in the grass where he'd tested the flame. We filed a report. Again. Another report in a growing mountain of ignored cries for help. But this time, something was different. This time there were witnesses. Because Buck had recorded the entire incident on his dashcam. Clear as day. David. A gas. The threats. Langley came by the next morning with a flash drive and a sheriff's deputy. They watched the footage. And for once, finally, an arrest warrant was issued. David was picked up that evening from a dive bar outside town. The local news ran the story before dawn. Whitmore brother arrested for arson attempt. Family feud reaches violent boiling point. It was no longer a land dispute. It was now a criminal case of conspiracy, violence, and attempted destruction. And the town couldn't look away anymore. People stopped me at the feed store, at the gas station, even outside church. "Miss Whitmore, I'm so sorry for what they did. I always knew something wasn't right with Calvin. My daughter watches the news every night. She wants to be brave like you. I didn't want fame. I wanted peace. But peace doesn't come until the truth stands taller than fear." And the truth was finally standing. The next day in court, I sat in the front row as the prosecutor laid out the evidence. Not just for the civil trial, but the mounting criminal case being handed over to the grand jury. Dean testified again, this time in David's criminal hearing. He spoke slowly, clearly. He didn't shake this time. "I love my brother," he said. "But love doesn't mean silence. And if he came to hurt Martha, he deserves to face what's coming." Calvin didn't show up that day. He sent a lawyer in his place. But the judge wasn't amused. She ordered bench warrants for any brother who skipped future hearings. That night I didn't sleep. I watched the wind move through the wheat fields and waited for the next attack. But it never came. Not that night. Instead, the next wave was something I never saw coming. Court order. Filed by a corporation I'd never heard of. Tide Rock Holdings. A shell company tied to a gas development firm based out of Austin. They claimed they had a lease agreement signed by Calvin, one that predated Daddy's death. They said the land belonged to them now. That Calvin sold it under Daddy's name fraudulently, but the documents had been legally binding. They were suing me for ownership. Langley nearly lost his mind when he saw the paperwork. "This is an ambush," he growled. "A corporate land grab wrapped in lies. What do we do?" "Yes. We file counterclaims. We prove fraud. We subpoena their board. We shine light into every shadow they've got." But I could see it in his eyes. They were trying to bury me in lawsuits. Bury me in fear. Wear me down until I gave up. And I might have. If I hadn't found the last page of Daddy's journal, tucked between the back cover and the leather binding. Just a single sentence. "If they take everything, remind them I taught you how to start from dust." That broke me. But it didn't break me down. Broke me open. I stared at the land outside, remembering the years I ran barefoot across that dirt, the days I fed calves from bottles, the nights I sang to the stars from the barn rafters. I wouldn't lose this place. Not because I couldn't, but because they didn't deserve it. We pushed back. Hard. Langley filed injunctions. The state attorney general requested federal oversight. Journalists began sniffing around the real estate documents. They found more than one dirty deed linked to Tide Rock Holdings. My brothers were pawns. They just didn't know they were disposable. And now that I'd exposed them, they were falling, one by one. Craig was arrested next, for forging survey documents. Then Ethan, for misuse of Daddy's life insurance account. Then Paul, for violating court orders and tampering with evidence. The ones still free. They were hiding. But I wasn't. I stood taller with each passing day. Every wound became a badge. Every bruise a banner. And then the call came. From Shannon Briggs, the journalist who'd first put my story on TV. "Martha," she said, "how do you feel about national coverage?" I blinked. "National? We're pitching your story to CBS. They're calling it the Whitmore War." I nearly dropped the phone. And then I smiled. Because I realized something. I hadn't just survived. I'd made history. That Sunday, a team from CBS arrived at my front porch. They filmed me walking the fields, flipping through Daddy's journal, holding up the original deed with trembling hands. They asked me what kept me going. I said, "You don't fight for land. You fight for what it means. And this land means I mattered." When it aired, the nation saw me. An old woman in a tattered house. But more than that, they saw strength. Letters flooded in from every state. People who had been silenced. People who had been betrayed by family. People who said my story gave them hope. But just as the light finally felt like it was settling in, the jury reached a verdict. We returned to the courthouse on a Tuesday morning under gray skies. I wore my father's Sunday coat draped across my shoulders. Dean walked beside me. Buck tipped his hat from his post by the door. And Langley held the case file like a soldier heading into battle. The courtroom was packed. Even those who once doubted me now sat behind me. Calvin, finally forced to appear, sat at the defense table, jaw tight. The foreman stood. Cleared his throat. Read the verdict. But before I tell you what it was, let me tell you what Calvin did just moments before the verdict was announced. He stood up, looked me straight in the eyes, and collapsed. Right there in front of the entire courtroom. So now I ask you, backhand index pointing right, what do you think Calvin was hiding that he didn't want the world to know? Backhand index pointing right, do you believe justice always comes, no matter how long it takes? Fire, drop your thoughts in the comments. Fire, like this video if you believe the truth is more powerful than blood. Fire, subscribe for the next chapter. The final verdict is here. Fire, share this story to help others who are afraid to speak up. The courtroom froze. Calvin's body hit the floor with a thud so loud it silenced even the judge's gavel. His lawyer shouted his name, rushing over. 2 bailiffs scrambled to check his pulse. Paramedics were called in. For a full 3 minutes, we all watched the man who had tormented me for decades convulse and collapse like a puppet whose strings had finally snapped. They said it was a panic attack, a stress-induced cardiac episode. I wasn't sure. All I knew was, the strongest of them, the leader, the mouthpiece, the one who had orchestrated every blow, every lie, every plan, crumbled in front of the entire town before the truth could be spoken aloud. Maybe it was poetic justice. Maybe it was cowardice. Maybe it was guilt. But I didn't move. I sat with my back straight and my chin high as they wheeled him out of the courtroom. The judge paused for a long moment before turning to the jury. "Do you feel prepared to proceed with the reading of the verdict?" she asked. The foreman stood. "We are, Your Honor." Langley placed his hand on mine under the table. It was the first time since this all began that he did that. And I knew why. This wasn't just a verdict. This was the final turning of a chapter I'd lived inside for 84 long, bleeding years. The foreman looked up and spoke. "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff Martha Whitmore on all counts." The room erupted. Cries. Murmurs of disbelief. Whispers of long-held secrets finally shattered by sunlight. But I just sat there, silent, letting the words soak into the roots of my bones. I won. The judge leaned forward. "The court also recognizes the mineral rights, land titles, and deed of inheritance as authentic and solely under the ownership of Martha Whitmore. All previous claims are hereby nullified." The gavel came down once. And with that sound, so much fell away. Years of silence, of bruises, of being told I was nothing. Gone. Langley exhaled beside me, almost laughing in disbelief. Dean's head dropped into his hands with quiet sobs. The remaining brothers. They didn't look at me. Not once. Because you can't look at someone who just became bigger than everything you feared. Afterward, I walked outside to find cameras flashing. Journalists shouting questions. Neighbors offering hugs. But I didn't say much. I just looked up at the sky and whispered to Daddy, "It's over." But it wasn't over, not fully. Because justice doesn't end in a courtroom. It lives in what comes next. The criminal trials went on for months. David took a plea deal. He confessed and cooperated, earning reduced time. Craig was sentenced to 3 years for evidence tampering. Paul faced restitution charges. Ethan disappeared and was caught months later living under a false name in Arkansas. The others received fines, community service, and public disgrace. Calvin. He was diagnosed with heart failure. He never stepped into a courtroom again. But he watched every one of my interviews on TV from his hospital bed. And one day I received a letter. Handwritten. No return address. It read, "You were never supposed to survive. But you did. I hated you for it. And now I see why Daddy chose you. I would have destroyed this land. You saved it. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I'm sorry. Calvin." I folded the letter and placed it in Daddy's journal. Because that's where all the truth lived now. In the months that followed, life began to bloom again. Neighbors brought pies and casseroles. The mayor asked me to speak at the town hall about land rights and elder justice. I started a foundation for rural women over 60, helping them protect their properties from exploitation and family fraud. We called it Dust to Dignity, because that's exactly where I came from and what I reclaimed. Dean stayed. He moved into the old tool shed, fixed it up with his own hands, and started working the land like we used to when we were kids, before greed poisoned his blood. We don't talk much about the others. Sometimes silence is the most peace you can give your heart. One warm spring morning, I walked the boundary line of my property, my land, with Buck by my side and a notebook in hand. There, in the northeast corner, I planted a wooden post. On it, I hung a brass plate etched with the words, "This land was almost taken by blood, but it was saved by truth." And beneath it, "In memory of the woman who refused to scream again." I didn't need a monument. That was enough. And then, on my 85th birthday, something happened that will stay with me for the rest of my days. A young woman showed up at my door. She held a notebook in one hand and a camera in the other. She said, "My name is Elena. I'm a journalism student. I saw your story. I just wanted to say thank you. My uncle tried to steal my grandma's house after my grandfather died. But we fought. Because of you. I let her in. We sat by the fire and drank warm cider. And I told her everything that never made it to air. The bruises. The screaming. The days I almost gave up. And when she left, she said, 'You're not just a survivor. You're a warrior.'" Smiled. Because that's what they always misunderstood. I was never just a victim. I was never weak. I was just waiting for the right moment to rise. Now let me ask you. Backhand index pointing right, have you ever been dismissed, silenced, or told you were too old to fight back? Backhand index pointing right, has your family ever taken more than you gave, and made you feel like you owed them your voice, your home, or your life? Martha's story isn't just about winning a case. It's about taking your power back. One truth, one breath, one silent scream at a time. If this story touched your heart, fire like this video to honor the warriors who came before you. Fire subscribe for more true stories of quiet power rising. Fire share this with someone who feels alone in their fight. Because their story matters. Your story matters. And sometimes the ones they try to bury become the strongest roots of all. Chapter 8 Word count. 3,122. Total story word count. 24,370. Would you like a bonus epilogue or perhaps a French or Spanish translation for your audio audience? Or shall I help you generate scene-by-scene visuals for YouTube? You said. Continue. ChatGPT said. Certainly. Since Chapter 8 brought closure to the central conflict and concluded with Martha reclaiming her life, what follows now is a bonus epilogue. An emotional, quiet, and reflective piece that ties up any remaining threads and leaves your audience with lasting peace, empowerment, and a deeper lesson. Epilogue. 3 years later. The porch still creaks. The wind still whistles through the wheat like a hymn sung just for me. The oak tree by the barn has grown a little wider, its arms stretched open like it's finally breathing again. And me. I'm still here. 87 years old now. I water the geraniums every morning and feed the chickens before the sun peeks over the hills. The barn's been rebuilt, stronger, warmer, and full of life again. The roof no longer leaks. The floors no longer groan. The past no longer haunts. Sometimes I sit in the rocking chair with Daddy's journal on my lap. I flip through it slowly, not to remember the pain, but to remember the survival. Pain ends, but what you build after, that's what lives. Dean tends to the land now. He never left after the trial. He bought back his dignity with sweat and silence. We don't talk much about the others. Not even when the letters come. Apologies in blue ink, sometimes from behind bars, sometimes from cold cities. I read them. Then I placed them in a box I've labeled Ghosts That Stayed on Paper. One day, a little girl from the town school came knocking with her mother. She held a crayon drawing of a house, a barn, and a stick figure with white hair. "You're my hero," she said. I didn't know what to say. So I knelt down, took the drawing and whispered, "You be your own hero one day, okay? Because that's the truth, isn't it? Sometimes no one comes. Sometimes you scream and no one hears. Sometimes you wait for a rescue that never arrives. And sometimes, you stand up yourself. You fight. Even if your hands shake and your voice breaks and your bones ache. Even then. Especially then. Because there's something holy about an old woman who refuses to go quietly. Something sacred about the ones who rise from dust with a memory like steel and a heart that never rusts. I was never just Martha Whitmore. I was never just the sister. I was never just the old lady with the will. I was the fire that survived the smoke. The voice that outlived the silence. The woman they tried to bury, but forgot she was rooted. If Martha's journey moved your heart, taught you a lesson, or gave you the courage to take your own story back, please, fire like this video to show the world what quiet power looks like. Fire subscribe so you never miss another story that reminds you. You are never too old to fight for your truth. Fire share this with a mother, a grandmother, or a friend who needs to remember just how strong they are. Speech balloon and tell us below. What did Martha teach you? What moment broke you? And what moment helped you rise again? Her story may be finished, but yours is still being written.